October 21, 2012. The courtroom fell silent as Alyssa Bustamante stood before the judge awaiting a sentence that would define the rest of her life. Years earlier, she had been a troubled teenager whose actions horrified an entire nation after the murder of 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten. Now, the headlines were no longer focused on how the crime unfolded, but on what kind of punishment could possibly follow it. Alyssa Bustamante was not condemned to die. There would be no execution chamber, no final date circled on a calendar. Instead, the court delivered something slower and far more uncertain. A life sentence in prison, paired with the possibility of parole and additional consecutive years that ensured her punishment would extend deep into adulthood and likely beyond it. When the hearing ended and the cameras shut off, Bustamante vanished into the correctional system, a closed world built on control, repetition, and long-term confinement. Yet public attention did not disappear with her. Her name continued to resurface in documentaries, articles, and heated debates whenever parole was mentioned. Many people argue that death would have been true justice, that life in prison is a softer alternative, that allowing someone to live is an act of mercy. But that assumption ignores how punishment truly operates inside prison walls. Life behind bars is not a pause before freedom. It is a condition that reshapes identity, time, and hope itself. In this video, I am going to show you why Alyssa Bustamante's prison existence may represent a punishment some would consider worse than death. But first, Alyssa Bustamante was prosecuted in adult court, and that single decision reshaped every outcome that followed. It removed the possibility that her actions would ever be framed as youthful error or temporary deviation. The justice system did not treat her crime as something that could be corrected through maturity or rehabilitation alone. Instead, it treated it as permanent, defining, and irreversible. Adult court meant adult consequences, consequences designed not to expire with age. She entered a guilty plea to second-degree murder, a charge that carries its own weight even without embellishment. Alongside it came a conviction for armed criminal action, a legal addition that altered the structure of her punishment. These charges were not symbolic. They were deliberate tools used to construct a sentence that would extend far beyond adolescence, far beyond early adulthood, and potentially beyond hope itself. The court imposed a life sentence for the murder, then added decades after it, not alongside it. Consecutive sentencing matters because it does not allow punishments to blend into one another. It forces them to stack, one waiting for the other to finish. Even if parole were ever granted on the life sentence, the additional years would still stand in line, untouched, unavoidable. This is where the promise of parole begins to lose its meaning. On paper, parole suggests possibility. In practice, it behaves like a distant horizon that never draws closer. Reviews come and go, each accompanied by scrutiny, public pressure, and reminders of why release is considered dangerous. Victims' voices return. Prosecutors reinforce caution. The legal system allows parole to exist, but it offers no emotional stability. There is no timeline to rely on, no guarantee to work toward, only the requirement to wait indefinitely. Alyssa Bustamante did not receive a sentence that moves toward resolution. She received one that expands over time, ensuring accountability does not peak and conclude, but continues to accumulate. The courtroom door closed behind her that day, and the judge's words ended the hearing. From the outside, the case appeared finished. In reality, the punishment had barely begun. Long before the sentence was imposed, Alyssa's life had been shaped by instability rather than consistency. Her childhood lacked a steady foundation. Family disruption was persistent, creating an environment where supervision fluctuated and emotional support was unreliable. Mental health struggles appeared early and did not fade quietly into the background. She was not a child moving smoothly through adolescence. She was a teenager already wrestling with internal distress that had no clear outlet. Reports and later accounts describe recurring emotional turmoil, including self-harm behaviors that pointed to deeper psychological instability. These were not isolated incidents. They formed patterns that repeated over time. Social isolation followed naturally. Alyssa did not form strong peer bonds. She spent extended periods withdrawn, detached, and focused inward. Rather than processing thoughts through conversation or guidance, she internalized them. Boundaries that are often reinforced by adults or peers were weak or absent, leaving her increasingly alone inside her own mental landscape. This environment did not automatically produce violence. Many individuals grow up amid instability without harming others, but it did create a space where troubling thoughts went unchallenged. There was no consistent external force interrupting or redirecting her internal narrative. As her emotional state deteriorated, her thinking became increasingly detached from consequence. Self-harm blurred the boundary between pain and control. Isolation weakened empathy. Over time, curiosity about extreme actions began to replace fear of them. None of this excuses what followed. Context does not absolve responsibility. But it matters because these conditions did not vanish once she entered the justice system. The same instability that existed before the crime would later collide with confinement, control, and punishment, intensifying rather than resolving under pressure. Elizabeth Olten was 9 years old when she crossed paths with Alyssa Bustamante. They lived in the same neighborhood, close enough for familiarity to create trust. It was the kind of trust that makes brief interactions feel harmless. Alyssa led Elizabeth away from her home and toward a nearby wooded area. This movement was not accidental. It was deliberate, guiding a child from visibility into isolation, away from houses, away from witnesses, away from interruption. Once inside the woods, the attack occurred. It was violent but not chaotic. There was no evidence of panic or sudden retreat. The actions continued until Elizabeth was dead. Afterward, Alyssa concealed the body in a shallow grave that had been prepared in advance. The burial was not an expression of shock. It was an attempt to erase evidence. Leaves and dirt were used to hide what had happened. The woods returned to stillness. Elizabeth was reported missing when she failed to return home. The search that followed was urgent and public. Law enforcement canvassed the area. Neighbors joined together. A community searched for a child who should have been safe. Investigators eventually focused on Alyssa. She did not maintain denial indefinitely. During questioning, she led police to the burial site. The grave confirmed the worst fear. Elizabeth Olten had been murdered. The discovery ended the search but opened a deeper question. The facts were clear. The timeline was established. Responsibility was not in dispute. What remained uncertain was intent. There was no provocation, no personal conflict, no defensive explanation that could soften the reality. The crime was not accidental. It was not reactive. It unfolded from beginning to end by choice. What shocked investigators was not only that a child had been killed, but the controlled nature of the act. The planning, the concealment, the absence of hesitation once it began. The most disturbing element emerged later. When investigators examined Alyssa Bustamante's writings, the case shifted from horrifying to deeply unsettling. Her diary did not describe rage or fear. It described curiosity. She wrote about wanting to know what it felt like to kill someone. Not as a metaphor, not as a passing thought, but as an objective. The language reflected emotional detachment rather than loss of control. There was no indication the act overwhelmed her. It appeared to satisfy a question she had been carrying internally. This matters because it removes impulse as an explanation. Impulsive crimes often unravel under pressure. This one did not. It was preceded by thought, followed by concealment, and documented privately. At the time, there was no language of remorse. The tone was observational, almost experimental, as though the act had been something to experience rather than mourn. This is where sympathy erodes completely. Mental health struggles explain vulnerability, not intent. Curiosity about killing reflects a profound disconnection from consequence and from the humanity of the victim. Elizabeth was not targeted for who she was. She was chosen because she was accessible, trusting, and vulnerable. That reality sharpens the moral weight of the crime. The diary entries followed Alyssa into courtrooms and parole discussions. They became permanent markers of motive. Words that cannot be erased. Words that freeze intent in time. Those words did not remain outside the prison gates. They followed her directly into confinement, shaping how her crime would be remembered and judged every day that followed. Once the sentence was imposed, Alyssa Bustamante faded from public view. The case that once dominated headlines entered a quieter phase. Cameras left. Public commentary slowed. What remained was a transfer into the Missouri prison system, where punishment is not debated but administered. State custody is not dramatic. It is methodical. Identity is reduced to essentials. A name becomes a number. Choices narrow to what is permitted. The outside world, with its outrage and noise, is replaced by institutional silence. This is where long-term incarceration truly begins, not with confrontation, but with removal. Removed from family life. Removed from autonomy. Removed from forward momentum. Inside prison, days are measured by repetition rather than events. The shift from public horror to controlled custody is abrupt. One moment a case is defined by what happened. The next it is defined by what will never happen again. Freedom, privacy, unstructured time are not gradually taken. They are cut away. Prison is built for endurance. Time does not move toward resolution. Unlike the outside world, prison preserves memory. Files follow. Charges follow. Reputation follows. The system does not forget. Inside, the crime becomes the lens through which everything else is seen. Daily life is defined by regulation. Movement is scheduled. Space is assigned. Hours belong to the institution. Routine removes unpredictability, but it also removes meaning. Days blur. Weeks collapse into months. Months into years. For someone serving a life sentence with additional years attached, routine becomes the environment itself. There is no milestone that alters the rhythm. Time becomes punishment through duration rather than intensity. Prison hierarchy reinforces this further. Crimes are ranked socially. Being known as a child killer carries permanent stigma. There is no reset. Information spreads. Reputation solidifies. This punishment does not require isolation cells. It operates through avoidance and exclusion. Trust becomes scarce. Relationships remain guarded. Isolation deepens quietly. Over time, withdrawal becomes internalized. The mind turns inward. Thoughts repeat. Perspective narrows. Improvement does not arrive automatically. Programs exist, but without a defined endpoint, effort becomes maintenance rather than progress. Hope decays through repetition. Years resemble one another. Milestones lose meaning. This is where the philosophical question returns. What is harsher? Death delivered once or life carried out slowly without conclusion? Execution ends punishment through finality. Life imprisonment replaces finality with endurance. Accountability does not end, persists. The individual wakes each day inside the consequences of their actions. In this case, the system chose continuation over conclusion. There is no closing chapter, only permanence. Worse than death does not mean visible suffering. It means punishment without resolution. It means existence defined entirely by consequence. There is no dramatic ending, only continuation. Alyssa Bustamante will wake tomorrow inside the same walls, the same schedules, the same restrictions, the same identity defined by what she did. Nothing about that morning will announce change. There will be no message of release, no turning point, no new direction. Tomorrow will mirror today, just as today mirrored yesterday. This is what permanence looks like inside the justice system. Not drama, not spectacle, but inevitability. The inevitability that time will move forward without resolution. That accountability will stay active. That consequence will never fully run its course. There is no guarantee that insight will alter the outcome. No promise that years endured will translate into freedom. The system does not provide closure, provides containment. For some, this feels appropriate, a sentence that refuses to end for a crime that cannot be reversed. For others, it forces an uneasy question about endurance as punishment, and whether justice should finish or simply continue. The court has already spoken. What remains is interpretation. Is life imprisonment a balanced response that keeps responsibility alive? Or is it a sentence meant to survive hope itself? The answer is left to the observer. This is the reality of prison life in this case. A punishment that unfolds slowly, one that offers no clean conclusion. One truth remains undeniable. There is no escape from what has been done. This is Court of Secrets, where the past endures and justice stands.